The battle for capital, what every mining CEO needs to know about climate risk. In this presentation, I will be drawing many examples from the gold mining industry. The number one takeaway that you need to know is that climate risks are financial risks and need to be treated like any other risk. Inaction on climate risks by a mining CEO is not in the best interests of their company's investors. Why should we address climate risk? It is not just a feel-good exercise or the right thing to do. There are genuine financial benefits for tackling climate risks. It allows easier access to capital. Not only are your credit credentials assessed, but ever increasingly your climate risks or understanding of are also evaluated to see if it fits within the lender's or equity investor's climate risk parameters. You can access lower cost debt and equity capital. We see concessional rates on debt available. Having a lower carbon risk translates to a higher firm value or market capitalization compared to a comparable company with a high carbon risk. These benefits are not only available to established producers, but to exploration and development companies seeking to develop their first mine. I know of a gold developer offered a 25 basis points discount for funds towards undertaking their pre-feasibility study. Investors are demanding to understand the climate risks of financial institutions' portfolios. Carbon footprints of the investments that financial institutions undertake are being scrutinized as part of a greater focus on ESG. Some investments are considered riskier, such as thermal coal, due to the risk of thermal coal mines becoming stranded assets in the future. For financial institutions to better understand their climate risks, they are placing pressure on the mining companies they invest in or lend to disclose their climate risks. They are requiring the mining companies to disclose climate risks in accordance with specific reporting protocols. For example, BlackRock wants companies it invests in to report in accordance with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, and the Sustainable Accounting Standard Board, SASB. The key climate risks to gold mining are water scarcity and extreme weather events, which has put greenhouse gas emissions clearly in the spotlight. Greenhouse gas emissions are being used as a measure of a company's climate risk. Companies are being assessed on their total greenhouse gas emissions and a greenhouse gas emissions intensity basis at the mine and corporate level. For some commodities, there is a higher degree of focus on the greenhouse gas emissions of the entire supply chain, which includes upstream emissions from suppliers and downstream emissions from customers. For example, there is a particular focus on Scope 3 emissions, especially downstream emissions for iron ore and coal. Greenhouse gas emissions intensity can be reported in many ways. For example, for gold, greenhouse gas emissions per ore ton processed or per ounce of gold produced are the two most common emissions intensity metrics. For making financial comparisons, using emissions by a unit of a commodity produced is best. For example, for gold and copper respectively, greenhouse gas emissions per gold ounce produced or greenhouse gas emissions per ton of copper produced. It is important to note that greenhouse gas emissions intensity by a unit of commodity produced is also affected by the energy source of the mine, the mining method, whether open pit or underground, and the type of underground stoping or block caving, the ore grade, the higher the grade, the lower the emissions intensity, and vice versa, the processing method, the depth of the mine, the age of the infrastructure. Modern infrastructure is far more energy efficient than old infrastructure. What do I need to consider when it comes to climate risk? How do I avoid inadequate disclosure and communication of greenhouse gas emissions and climate risks? Which reporting metrics do I use? Some are more meaningful than others. Interpretation. What do my changes in emissions and metrics mean? Was it due to just changing physical parameters in the mine or actual measures taken to abate greenhouse gas emissions? What is the impact of my supply chain on my overall emissions footprint? What are my Scope 3 emissions? This can be very different for different commodities. For example, In gold mining, most Scope 3 emissions are upstream emissions from suppliers. In contrast, for iron ore, it is downstream emissions from customers. Do I understand the benefits, for example, the financial benefits, or what the ramifications of doing nothing are, risk to reputation and company value? How important is it to differentiate yourself from other commodities? I knew of a gold miner looking to effectively differentiate itself from coal miners to improve its value proposition as an investment. Here is a country-weighted average greenhouse gas emissions intensity curve for gold mining. One can use this as a proxy for the potential climate risk of gold mines in these countries. However, the range of the individual mines in these countries can be quite large. Finland has the lowest greenhouse gas emissions intensity, and South Africa over 20 times higher, the greatest. Compared to the other countries, Australia is at the higher end of the emissions intensity curve. On average, it is 2.5 times higher than Canada. South Africa is 4 times higher than Australia on average. In this data set, the Macassa mine in Canada had the lowest greenhouse gas emissions intensity of 53 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per ounce. Macassa benefits from low emissions energy. It is a high-grade underground mine and uses almost an entirely electric mining fleet. 100 times higher is the Cook mine in South Africa, with 5.3 tons of CO2 equivalent per ounce. A notable absentee on this graph is China, the world's largest gold producer. There is presently no individual mine greenhouse gas emissions data. Based on a life cycle assessment study, an estimated emissions intensity was derived of approximately 1,200 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per ounce. The primary reason for the differences between countries is the source of the country's energy. Countries with access to low emissions energy, hydroelectricity, nuclear, and renewables have a competitive advantage over those countries with high emissions energy dominated by fossil fuels. Here is a more up-to-date greenhouse gas emissions intensity curve of individual gold mines in Canada and Australia. It shows the range of greenhouse gas emissions intensities for both countries are quite large. Canada from approximately 50 to 900 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per ounce, and Australia 250 to 1,200 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per ounce. The lowest quartile by production is dominated by underground mines in Canada. The higher end of the curve is dominated by Australian gold mines. The highest Canadian mine, Meadowbank, is an open-pit mine in the Nunavut province and has to generate its own electricity on site from diesel, explaining its position as it is comparable to Australian mines that have to do the same. In general, you find underground mines have the lower and open-pit mines the higher greenhouse gas emissions intensity. Many open-pit mines will transition to underground mines in their lifetime, lowering their emissions intensity and hence climate risk. However, there are other factors that can work against you, such as declining ore grades. Understanding the climate risk of mines by measuring their greenhouse gas emissions and comparing them on an emissions intensity basis. You also need to understand the mining and processing physicals of the operations and not just look at the headline numbers. Mining is an emissions-intensive business. Mining is necessary as it will provide many of the products required to transition to a low-carbon economy. Ensuring your company can secure capital for the future not only requires a technically sound project, it needs to be sustainable with ESG at its core. Dependent on where your company is within its life cycle, you will need to have a plan on how to address your climate risks. Effectively understand, communicate, and disclose your climate risks. Understand the climate risks in your supply chain, upstream and downstream. Set greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets for the future. Plan and undertake measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through abatement activities by energy substitution and/or energy efficiencies. ESG issues are increasing in importance, with sustainable investing becoming the new normal. Mining companies looking to decarbonize with a view to being sustainable will win the battle for capital. For more information, please contact me at CSA Global. Thank you.